Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, the Cottage Witch, and today I'm going to do a quick update on my reading for the last week because it's the Tarot Readathon run by Deja and Noelle, who I'll link below, and Elizabeth from Museum Crack Reads, and a few other people. Anyway, I'll link the introduction video and their channels below if you're interested. It's quite fun so far. So this is the third week, and basically you pick a tarot card and they have tarot prompts, and then you find a book that matches that prompt, and there are teams and you're sort of competing against each other, which is fun. So this week I am really tired of violent books. So I'm reading Terry Pratchett at the moment, but let's start out with the violent books. So I read Blindness by José Saramago, which is from Portugal. I mean, he is from Portugal, but for the Read Around the World challenge, which I'm also doing right now. It counts for Portugal. So that's fun. I put off reading it for, I don't know how many years, and I don't know why, because I actually liked it quite a lot more than I thought I would. I don't know why I wasn't sure if I'd like it. It's really fascinating. There are definitely some moments where I can see why blind people don't like it, because some of the things, some of the violent choices that are attributed to blindness, this mass blindness epidemic, are kind of ridiculous. Like, blind people don't go around doing these things. Now, if you attribute it to people being scared and unreasonable, that would be a different matter. But if it's attributed to the fact of being blind, then it doesn't really float in several cases. So yeah, I get why people who are blind have issues with this book, because it's not without its issues, but it's also, I mean, the satirical part is quite interesting. It does have a lot that's interesting to say about society and how societies behave in crisis. And so that was really good. And then I did sort of skip over one chapter with essay. This is going to be the next three, 4 books. There's a lot of violence and essay, so content warning for that, I guess. So I skimmed over the chapter that I knew had the assault in it, and then started the next book, which was the rapiest book I've ever read in my life. It's called Beauty is a Wound by Eka Kurniawan, who is Indonesian, and it's advertised as like this grand epic multi-generational saga in the style of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and it does have some similarities. I don't think it's as good, but there are comparable components. However, the violence is relentless, particularly the sexual violence against women and girls, particularly between like 8 and 14 years old. It is absolutely relentless. Like every 5 minutes in the audiobook there's another essay. It's absolutely bonkers. Oh yeah, I needed to take a break at one point during that book, because so on the one hand, yes, it's an allegory for colonialism in Indonesia, which has been relentless over many centuries and exceedingly violent. So there are many times in the book where the comparisons do make a certain amount of sense. However, it's just constant, and also the way men talk about assault is as though it's not really assault, like ravishing women and that sort of that kind of thing. Also, they talk about sex with girls as though it's also not assault. So there's definitely some moments that are, well, basically none of the book is a comfortable read. It's interesting. It's not comfortable. It very much is not. It does have some magical realism elements, mostly in the beginning and the end, which were pretty cool. And there's a lot about it that I like. Like, the allegory does make a certain amount of sense. That doesn't mean it's easy to read. So that was a challenging book. So then at one point, I switched to another audiobook called Purge by Sofi Oksanen from Finland, without realizing what it was about. And it's about a survivor of human trafficking. So it wasn't really a break in the violence against women at all. Purge, though, is a bit different in that, for the most part, aside from a couple of flashbacks, the violence has already happened, and it's this girl trying to figure out how to survive now that she's on the run from her traffickers. So it takes place in Estonia. I think Oksanen writes a lot. She's, I think, grew up between the two countries, as I understand it, but is born in Finland, I think. Anyway, it's set in Estonia. A lot of the characters are Russian, a few Finnish, and I think a few German. And there are two main female characters who are both really, really well done. And they're both dealing with enormous amounts of trauma. The one girl, it's not really a spoiler because it's on all the summaries, but the older woman she runs into, who's I think her great aunt, she ends up in the home of her great aunt, kind of accidentally, kind of on purpose. I won't get into all the what and how and all that, but basically these are the two women who've both been through extremely traumatic events in their lives. So the great aunt lived through both the Second World War and then communism, and trying to survive both of these things, which were incredibly challenging, obviously, and extra challenging, as always seems to be the case for women, for reasons of usually assault and unreasonable expectations. And so this woman has been living on her own for decades at this point, and has sort of figured out how to survive, but not, I mean, she's surviving. She's not really thriving, I wouldn't say. But she's surviving in her own way. And she's very particular about that way and protecting it. And then this girl comes into her life who's severely traumatized. But because of the political context, it takes her a while to realize that that's why the girl is behaving the way she is. And so most of the book is switches between their interactions and then flashbacks to the previous events in both of their lives. And it's so interesting. It's a really, really good book. It's not a thriller. I think it's marketed as like suspense or something, which tracks. Like, that works. It's not really a thriller. It's not really a mystery, but it is very suspenseful. And I totally forgot I had it in French. So I listened to the audiobook in English, which was very good. But it is actually good enough that I'll keep this copy in French and possibly reread it at some point, because, yeah, it's a good book. Not non-violent. And then the next book I listened to as well is by an author from the Philippines, Patricia Evangelista, called Some People Need Killing, which, as the title suggests, is not any less violent. Less about sexual assault, though, and more about just straight up murders. So it came out pretty recently under the previous prime minister, I can't remember, of the Philippines, Roberto Duarte, something like that. I can't remember exactly how to pronounce his name. He engaged in a lot of these extrajudicial killings, as they're called, basically of his political opponents, allegedly of drug smugglers and drug addicts and criminals. In practice, a lot of political opponents and a lot of people that the police officers in question just didn't like, or the thugs in question just didn't like. A lot of kids have been killed, obviously outside of the justice system altogether. So it's been quite violent. And the title is taken from, so this journalist did a bunch of interviews, and one of them was with one of the killers, who said that he's not a bad person, but some people need killing. And it's really it's an astonishingly well done piece of journalism, this book. We need more journalism like this in the world at the moment. It's really thorough. It's not sensationalized. It's about extreme subject matter, but it's not like a lot of 24-hour TV is all sensationalized and dramatized for ratings. It's not that. It's much more grounded than that in, well, the facts. And so she doesn't get carried away. It is obviously very dramatic because of the subject matter, but I think she handles it extremely well and about as fairly as you can handle this sort of subject matter. It's such a good book. And then the next one I read was Crossing the Mangrove, Traversée le Mangrove by Maryse Condé. She is from Guadeloupe. I think she's passed away now, but she won the Nobel Prize in Literature a while back. And it is a beautiful book. So I have the English version and the French version. And I started reading, so I read about a third in French. And then I was switching back and forth because I'm trying to learn French, but I'm such an incredibly slow reader in French. And her writing, like, I could tell it was beautiful in both languages. And so I wanted to use this as a resource to study French. And it worked for about a third of the book, and then I just finished it in English because I just wanted to understand more and not have it take quite so long, because it really did. I'm such a slow reader in French. It's very frustrating sometimes. And then I listened to It Would Be Night in Caracas by Karina Sainz Borgo. Apologies for any name mispronunciations. It was alright. It was a very zoomed in look on one particular character. So there was clearly a lot in terms of politics and society going on in Venezuela when the book is set, which I assume is pretty contemporary. But you only sort of get bits and pieces of that as she's trying to get out of Venezuela. And the storyline is interesting. The concept of the book is fantastic. The execution, there was something for me personally that was a bit missing, in that even though the main character had a lot of traits that usually I would like in a main character, I just didn't feel like I could connect with her in any sort of emotional way. So it all felt a bit at a remove, which is a bit too bad. Beyond that, the actual story was quite good. So I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I read it, but it's not a book I'd reread or anything. Then, to get away from all the exceedingly ridiculous amounts of violence, I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, which was quite fun. I didn't love it as much as other people love it. Like, I know some people are obsessive about this book and are just crazy about it. And I liked it. It was fun. It was funny. It was very clever. It was very silly. I'm still not really sure what to make of it. But that's okay. But maybe that's why I don't really know what to say about it. Like, it's an exceptionally strange book. It's like sci-fi and comedy, and I don't read a lot of humorous sort of books. I don't read a ton of sci-fi either. I read a little bit now and again. So this was a bit out of my wheelhouse. But, you know, overall, I'd say I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as some people do. And then I read Tomorrow, Tomorrow, Inshallah by Sara Cheikh. She's Sahrawi, from Western Sahara. Let's see if they have a map in here, because it's basically Morocco thinks they own what used to be the Spanish colony of the Western Sahara. There's a refugee camp in Algeria where she grew up. Partially she grew up in Spain, partially in Algeria. But Morocco has built an incredibly long wall dividing the sort of sovereign part of Western Sahara from the part that they've basically annexed. So there's a lot of discussion about their fight for their independence. She grew up between a refugee camp in Algeria and I can't remember which city in Spain, but her parents had sent her there to get an education with her twin sister. And yeah, it's so interesting. Like, this is what I love about reading around the world. As soon as you read a book like this, you realize how little stereotypes accomplish. Really, because it puts human faces on people in these camps. And she talked at one point about one of the girls listening to like Billie Eilish and K-pop on YouTube. And it brings home the fact that they're humans. They're ordinary, modern humans living in a refugee camp in Algeria. And at one point they go into Western Sahara because there was a part that was sovereign, at least for a while. I don't know that it still is, where her grandmother lived. And so they went to visit her, and then they got stuck there during the pandemic. And there's a bit of the story wanders into her trying to get like smuggled out and back into Spain territory so she can go back to school and work and all that. But it's so fascinating how you could read about different cultures that are so extremely different from mine, but also the people are just ordinary people, you know. That's one of my favorite things about reading around the world. And then I listened to Rainbirds by Clarissa Guadeloupe. I think she's from Singapore, but the book is set in Japan. And it's a good family story about grief. It's not a good mystery. It's marketed sort of as a murder mystery. It isn't. I mean, there is a murder and there is kind of a mystery. The mystery part of the writing, though, is extremely underwhelming. So it'd be better, I think, to approach it just as a book about a young man grieving the death of his sister who's just been murdered, and trying to understand what happened. Because that's basically what it is. And it does that very well. But if you're expecting murder mystery, that it's not that. There are some things he sort of happens upon. It's all a little... the actual outcome is plausible. The way he happens upon certain facts and gets like job offers and house offers and all this sort of thing is a bit implausible. Like, there are things about it that just don't make a lot of sense. But when you get to the actual relationship between the brother and sister, it's quite good. It's a very sort of quiet book. And then I've started... So the other book to cheer myself up after all the violence that I started is The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This is the first Discworld book. I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm about halfway through. I'm not entirely sure what I think yet. Like, there are a lot of parts that are funny, and then there are a lot of parts that are just weird. So there's still a couple other books I may listen to. Like, I want to read Equal Rights more, and there's one or two other witches ones that I want to read. So I may not read the entire series. I think they're like 40 odd novels. But it's, yeah, so far it's fun. It's not blowing my socks off, but it's fun. And then I have been trying to read Gate of the Sun by Elias Khoury. So he's a Lebanese author, but it's set in between Lebanon and Palestine. And it's told as a series of stories that one character, Khalil, tells to Eunice as Eunice is in a coma. And I just don't know. Like, it's got all these incredible blurbs and things about it. And I'm about yay far in, what, like a fifth of the way in, and I just don't know. I don't know. Like, it's interesting intellectually, but it's hard to get into the characters' lives when I think it's because it jumps around so much between different time periods and places in the two people's lives. So he tells some of his own story, and then he tells some of the story of this man that he's telling stories to. which was a little confusing at first, but I think I've gotten that sorted out in my head now. So maybe I'll keep going for a bit and see if I can get more into it. The idea of the book is interesting, and some of the little moments in the story about people's lives in, I think it's the West Bank, or what became the West Bank in like 51 or something. Like, I think it's set in about 51, at least part of it, are interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still working on that one. We'll see. In the meantime, I just started today Jewels of Allah, The Untold Story of Women in Iran by Nina Ansari. I followed her on Instagram for a long time, and I really like her. She's, I think, a historian or sociologist or something. Anyway, an academic of some sort. And this was apparently based on her PhD thesis, but rewritten for non-academics. And so the introduction goes through some of the myths about, and I'm only on chapter 2. So the first one is all these misconceptions about there not being much of a women's movement in Iran. Iranian women didn't advocate for their freedom until recently. Lack of common ground between secular and religious women in Iran, that sort of thing. So she goes over those misconceptions in the first chapter, and then the following chapters sort of dive into one of these, each of these misconceptions. And so far it's pretty interesting. But I'm only on chapter 2, so we shall see. I've read a little bit about Iran, both some fiction and nonfiction from Iranian authors before, so it's not entirely, I mean, it's a foreign country to me, but it's not entirely unknown territory to me, you know, like I know some of the history now. But I don't think you need to read this book. I think she's pretty clear about, you know, what's going on when. And then it's got some women of note, I guess you could say, in the end. Like famous Iranian women, or women who should be famous for their sort of feminist work, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, that's what I'm gonna read for, I think, the rest of today. So that was my week 3 in the Tarot Readathon. That's all for today, and see you all next time.